Can everyone see that?
Yes, awesome.
Awesome, cool. Okay, so today I'm going to talk about the politics of death in the Neolithic of Northwest Arabia. So based on the Mustatil tradition that we've been working on for the last couple of years. Before I start, I want to state that there are images of human remains in this presentation. So just a warning. So, oh, sorry, there's something annoying on my screen. I can't see it all. I'm going to present work from two projects that myself and Hugh Thomas have run. Firstly, through the Aerial Archaeology in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia project, which was run out of the University of Western Australia between 2018 and 2022. Over the course of that project, we identified we excavated 5 mustatils and we surveyed more than 100 of them on the ground. And more recently, starting from this year, we started a new project based at the University of Sydney, which is the Prehistoric Al-Ula and Khyber Excavation Project. And we've so far excavated 5 mustatils as part of that, and some of the first ones in Khyber, which has been very interesting as well. So this work is a collaboration between the University of Western Australia, the University of Sydney, and the Royal Commission for Al-Ula. And my thing does not like me. Oh, there we go. So far we've identified about 1,600 mustatil through remote sensing and aerial photography. They're really focused on Northern Arabia. So mainly in sort of that northwest corner, but they do extend as far east as almost the Gulf. So there's quite a broad spread of them. They cover about 300,000 square kilometers. So we're talking about a really vast area they're found over. We often find them in clusters. So you'll find them ranging in number from sort of 3 or 4 up to as many as 28 in one area. But the greatest concentration of them are in the counties of Al-Ula and Khyber. And in these areas in particular, they're found in a variety of different geological and geographic landscapes and topographies. And what's really interesting is there's really no clear orientation. When you find them clustered, sometimes the heads will be pointing one way, the base will be pointing another. There's no direction, no evidence of any direction towards any kind of cardinal points or any kind of astronomical or features as well. So yeah, no clear orientation. What's also really interesting is that some of them are almost hidden. You wouldn't know that they were there until you stumble across them, whilst others are like very visible. So they'll be on the sides of volcanoes or they'll be on the sides of mountains, while others are built right on top of mesas. So again, you would not see that unless you knew they were there. So at the moment, we've dated, and as has Weil and Maria, who's in the room, have dated a couple of them, and they all date to the late Neolithic. And what's interesting, particularly in Al-Ula and what we're now finding in Khyber as well, is that it's the same type of elements are found in them. So we're finding horns and upper cranial elements of domestic and wild taxa. In our work, we're finding it's predominantly cattle. And what's also interesting is in quite a few of them, mainly in Al-Ula, not so much in Khyber, but we find later deposits of human remains in them. And that's what I'm going to be talking about today. So for those of you who don't know, the mustatil, these are the key features of them. So they're obviously rectangular in shape. They have a head. Can you see my arrow? Is that sort of working? No? All right. You can see there's a head up the top, a base down the bottom, down in here. There's often an entranceway into the base, and you have these large, open, clear courtyards. So there's no real evidence of anything contemporaneous constructed inside them. You occasionally find things that look like they're built later, but these are sort of clear, open spaces. The long walls are very low in some of them, so as low as sort of 20 centimeters. In others, they can be as high as 1 meter. So with these low walls, they're meant to be this sort of clear demarcation of space. You could easily step over them, but you obviously didn't. You would enter these structures through the entranceway in the base. So because they can be quite a walk up these structures, so they can range in size from as small as 20 meters to over 600 meters. So they can be monstrously huge. So you can have some that may have been built by a single sort of or a small family group, and others are definitely being made by multiple groups coming together, because these are large and intricate periods of construction going on. And one of the key features is in the head, which is in this picture up here, it's up the top, you find either a single chamber or sometimes multiple chambers. And those are where we find most of the artifactual evidence. So the first one we excavated was in 2019. It's sort of cut into the bedrock, and we've got this sort of kind of trapezoidal chamber with a upright standing stone at the back, as well as some smaller ones. But this upright stone you can see in the back here is the main focus of the activity in here. So we found clustered around this were a series of sort of horns and upper cranial elements of wild and domestic animals. And with a breakdown of what we found, it's overwhelmingly cattle in this one. So, you know, almost sort of 80-90% cattle, with smaller proportions of indeterminate caprines. We had one fragment of gazelle, but overwhelmingly cattle. What's interesting was we found just sort of to the north of the structure, this small little cyst burial. And inside that, there was an individual who was aged around 30 to 40. There's some evidence of osteolipping, so they're developing arthritis and a herniated disc. And this individual dates a bit later. Sorry, what I should say is that I forgot to put it on this one. The faunal elements from this date to around 5200 to 5000 BC, whereas these human remains date to slightly later, so around 4600 to 4400. What's interesting about this individual, it's an MNI of 1, but because there's no repeating elements, but there's just sort of bits of people. Some of it looks like it was, it's articulated, so there must have been some soft tissue when some of these were placed in this cyst, because they are in anatomical, they are in like alignment. So whilst others may have been sort of defleshed, or they've been left in the ground so that it's just the bones that are collected. The next one we dug was again slightly different. It had 3 depositional events, and it was slightly earlier, around 53 to 51. And interestingly, with this one, no human remains. Also, the breakdown of the species is also different. So more caprines in this one. And this is the exception. This is the only one we have that has caprines as the most. It is overwhelmingly cattle. What's also interesting about this one is you can see that they have they've actually cut, this is the original chamber up the top here, it's been cut to create this new chamber in here. So this was only caprines in here, and in here it's a sort of a mixture of caprines and cattle in there. And also we found it looks like they displayed skulls of goats and sheep on the back wall here, because we found a lot of petrous bones that had fallen down the back of it. So it looks like they had skulls on display, which then sort of, as they decomposed, the petrous bones, which are one of the densest parts of the skeleton, sort of just fell down behind. But no human remains in this one. One of the other ones we've excavated this one's quite interesting. It's 3 depositional events, but only a single one that relates to faunal elements. And these faunal elements are slightly later, so around 4900 to 4700. But this one does have human remains. But as far as the faunal deposit, again, overwhelmingly cattle or boss. It's not always, you can't always tell whether they're domestic or not, but definitely sort of bovine remains. So with this one, we found 2 distinct deposits of human remains. So we've got an MNI of 2. The first one was a long bone that was just set on sort of the rear wall of the mustachil. And with the second one is slightly later, and it's the skull and sort of long bones that were deposited in here. Now, it looks like they've probably ripped out what was ever in the original faunal elements that were in there. So there was nothing left in there, and they've come back in and opened this up and deposited this individual in here. So one of the other things that we identified across the top of the mustatiel. It's covered in cattle teeth. And so it looks like, again, that there's an element of display going on here, that these bones haven't actually been pulled out from this sort of little chamber. Instead, they were actually always deposited on there. So we're starting to get an idea that there are two different ways of depositing the faunal remains. Some of them are on clear display and others of them are deposited in chambers. So again, you've got these two different deposits of humans. The first one actually could overlap with the faunal remains, but the other one is clearly much later. Another one, this is on the same mesa. So these ones are hidden. You wouldn't know they were here. And it's really hard to see. It's been turned into a later pendant burial. You can see it's very chewed up. There's a sort of a tail of and a tomb has been constructed in there. Again, excavation in the chamber here revealed almost sort of, 98% cattle. This one's slightly later than the other one. What's interesting about this mesa is there's 9 of them, 9 mustatiels on top of here, and you can actually see the progression of them. The earliest ones are on the edge of the rock outcrop, and they sort of move inwards as time progresses. So they're reusing this site to build these structures over a period of about 300 years or so. Here's another one. This one's also quite interesting. Again, 3 depositional events. We've got 2 faunal events. And with this, and you can see in the plan here, you have faunal elements found in this rear chamber in here, and then other examples found in this sort of central chamber. Again, there's some slight overlap, but it appears that the ones in the back are earlier than the ones sort of in that central chamber. But again, overwhelmingly cattle or boss remains. Now, unfortunately, this one's been disturbed quite a bit. So that stone, which is probably sealing this little chamber, which is really similar to one of the other ones we've excavated, that's in situ, how we found it. So they've just simply moved this stone aside to have a look at what's inside there. So what we found also was in this sort of central chamber, a pot, which it's a bit hard to know. We assume it dates to the late Neolithic because that's the only sort of datable remains we have in there. But again, because it's not a closed context, it's been looted, it's very difficult to see. But looking at the fabric, it does look to be Neolithic. And then in the rear chamber, we found, and in the courtyard as well, because the looting had been quite extensive, we found the remains of a 9 to 12-year-old child who lived around 4600 to 4500. So this individual was obviously deposited, was a primary interment. You can see we've got like finger bones, their epiphyses and things like that. So these are not the kind of bones that you're going to deposit necessarily if this is a secondary burial. So we've got a pretty good feeling that this one is a primary interment. Again, another one, a single depositional event, no human remains in this one. And again, 42 to 5,000. And this one, again, mainly cattle, but there are some that were a bit more difficult to tell, but clearly cattle are really the main kind of focus with this one. And then this brings us to the final one that we've excavated in Alula. This one was just done at the beginning of the year. 3 depositional events. First one is faunal at around 5200 to 4900, and then a phase of human remains from 48 to 47. And then what's really interesting is they come back, they modify the structure about 1,000 years later, and again deposit faunal elements. I'll show you in here. Again, we've got an upright stone. It was starting to fall, so we've had to chock it, you can see there. But this is what it looks like when we visited the site for the first time. So a clear upright stone in the center of the structure, which was really, it's very prominently displayed. You can walk down, this one's about 140 meters long, and down at the base, you can still see it because it's on a hill. You can see it quite clearly. So again, the breakdown of the faunal, again, mainly cattle. And what's also interesting is it had a deposit of arrowheads as well. We found 11 of them. These are sort of a Alula take on a Hapasa point. And these have been, have never been used. These have been napped specifically for deposit in this chamber. Again, horn deposits in this sort of main chamber here, as well as small little fires. And that's one of the other features we find are small fires across the structure. And then in the rear, also horns. You can see we've got a nice big cattle horn here with another one coming underneath it. So this one was found in this rear chamber. This group was found in this rear chamber. It looks like they're bundled together. So in both areas, we find that it is, again, horns and maxillary bone and teeth of these sort of horned animals. Again, another phase of human remains at around 4,700. You can just see random bits. And this is this quite interesting thing. They've modified this, this rear chamber and constructed this feature in here. And they've also deposited faunal remains, but this time it's sheep. It's not upper cranial elements. We find scapula. So it's slightly different, but conceptually it is quite similar. So a summary of what we found so far. So we've excavated 3 in Khyber, 7 in Al-Ula, and we've actually done a project I went back to a whole bunch of them that I'd originally surveyed, and actually you can find, because some of them look like they are displaying the skulls on top of the structures, you can actually find cattle petrous bones and cattle teeth sometimes in in situ. So you can actually collect sometimes surface material from these. And we've actually been able to date about 17 of them so far based on that. And they all cluster between 5,300 to 4,700, except for this little outlier at 4,400, which is the next one I'm going to dig. And again, in all of them, it's an emphasis on horned animals, but predominantly cattle. And that's what we're finding in Khyber as well. It looks like it's almost exclusively cattle, which is quite unusual. We thought we might have a bit more evidence of wild taxa because there's a lot of kites in that area, but no, it looks like it's pretty much all cattle as well. So in the ones in Al-Ula, 5 of the 7 have got later deposits of human remains. We haven't got any in Khyber so far. But these remains date to around 4,900 to 4,200, and we're finding the remains of both adults and juveniles. And these are also primary and secondary interments. And what's also interesting is that positioning varies. Some look like they're deliberately deposited, like the skeleton of the child would have been. Others look like they're just thrown in. They look like they've actually dug down a bit into it and just thrown in bits of human bodies, human body parts. So the key question is, like, what does this all mean? So one of the things I've been thinking about recently, and the rest of the team have been thinking about, is dead body politics. So there's a fantastic book called The Political Lives of Dead Bodies, Reburial and Post-Socialist Change by the American anthropologist Catherine Verity. And she writes this fantastic book about how body parts and bodies are used for political ends. So, I mean, how do you have politics in an era like the Neolithic? And one of the things that she says is that politics is essentially can happen at any time in any place. You know, it's a form of concerted activity amongst social actors. So it involves a stake in particular goals. And so when you look at politics from that aspect, you know, politics has always been around. So, and one of the great things about it is anyone can engage in it. And as we've read more and more, and I've been thinking more and more of this, you know, dead bodies have always been political. If we look in, Bill talked a little bit, I suppose there's a bit of politics in what Bill talked about. Examples in antiquity, you know, you've got the hasty burial of Tutankhamun. Sophocles talks about the contest between Thebes and Athens to host Oedipus in both life and death, because whoever has him in death, their city is bound for greatness. So, you know, there's this undercurrent of bodies and politics and ownership that comes through antiquity. But then we have to ask the question of why human dead bodies. I suppose the issue is that it's materiality. They're just there. They can be moved, they can be displayed, they can be strategically located, and they can essentially be owned. They can be anonymized as well. So there's no indication that these individuals have any they're specific individuals. It's more that symbolism. They become symbolic. It's the belief that's associated with the body, what the body represents and what it symbolizes. And I think the thing is, everyone has this shared recognition of the dead. Everyone it's a universal concern. We're all going to die. So there's an element of it is that sort of universalism. And finally, there's also a lot of cosmic concerns with that idea of meaning of life and death. And what's really interesting and particularly notable in Verity's book is that dead bodies become particularly important in periods of major upheaval, so such as post-socialist Europe. So in post-socialist Europe, they were used as a means of harnessing identity. So with the fall of the Soviet Union, as all these countries began to be formed, people or political actors in those countries wanted the sort of the repatriation of notable figures. So you have this massive trading going on of human bodies and remains during this period as people are exhuming and reburying people in different parts of the former Soviet Union. So how does this work for the Mustatil phenomenon? So we're sort of beginning to think that the deposition of these later human remains is a deliberate, like a political act. These are not. This is not just a. What's the right word? Not sort of just serendipitous. This is a deliberate act of design. So for instance, we actually don't find that many burials that date to this period outside of it. And we've dug a lot of tombs, but these are most of the human remains we have from the Neolithic are found in these. So it's a deliberate idea. One of the interesting things is that the human remains always post-date the first faunal offering. Okay, so there's very little evidence of an overlap. This is a distinct event. So there's nothing contemporaneous with it. And what's interesting is it's either within the Mustatil or it's in a purposely constructed feature. So there's that sort of that clear distinction going on between the human and the animal. So I suppose in summary, like with this dead body politics in the Arabian Neolithic, what's the point of it? So I think we're beginning to postulate that their human remains are used as a mechanism for asserting ownership. It's another way of asserting territoriality over the Mustatil. It's that symbolic function of depositing the ancestors in this structure is a way of maintaining a link with it. So it's that link, whether it's either real or imagined, with this earlier tradition. So then we have to ask ourselves, what is happening that we have to, this transition from animal deposits to human, what causes the ritual expression of this Mustatil tradition to change in the early to mid 5th millennium BCE? And we're beginning to wonder, and we've totally done a 180 of how we're looking at territoriality, but there are these cycles of them, and we think that there's a cyclical change, that there's no need to construct a Mustatil at this stage. So what we think that the Mustatils are generally about is probably about they're constructed as a group bonding event, because there are hundreds of people often involved in the construction of these, and that they're probably marking territory for pastoral territory. So what we're finding quite interestingly is that in the domestic remains, there's almost no cattle. So, but the Mustatil are filled with them. So there is potentially that they're not actually really eating the cattle, they're having them for secondary products, and they're only at very special events, either slaughtering them or depositing bits of them in there. So with the addition of the human remains, we are beginning to explore the idea that this concept of territoriality changes. It's not so much about animal remains, but that there's the depositing of sort of ancestors or human body parts in there for some unknown reason. So that leaves the question of whether this has got to do with anything with this sort of cosmic reordering or upheaval, and whether this might be linked to like the end of the Holocene human period or changes in the environment as the region starts. Questions for another day. But yeah, that's essentially what we're sort of beginning to think about. The appearance of all these human remains. I think I'm dying. Yeah. Anyway, sorry, my internet connection is dropping out. But yeah, that I'd just like to thank all our team and the Royal Commission for Al-Ula for supporting our work.
you very much, Melissa, for such